Welcome to the Darkstream. Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com. Welcome to the reprehensibles. Welcome to the unauthorized. Welcome to the VFM, to the Dread Ilk, and, as always, to the Bears. Tonight we're going to talk about Jordanetics, specifically rule number 6, the heroism of the couch potato. Now you've probably noticed that things are a little bit different tonight. Namely, I have gotten rid of the YouTube chat. I have gotten rid of the YouTube super chats. And I have gotten rid of the YouTube comments for the time being. Not really interested in hearing the opinions of Owen's haters. And I have no intention whatsoever of putting up with that kind of stuff. So that's that. The sooner we get to 30,000, the sooner we can go to members only chat. And we will do that, and we will leave it at that. It's kind of funny. I never even wanted comments on my blog. I put comments on the blog as a courtesy to the readers. I do not care in the slightest about whether this Darkstream has comments or not. Obviously, some of you do enjoy it, but the blog readers have been very, very clear that they actually prefer not having comments. So that's how we're going to do it until we get to the members only stuff, or until we're able to have the same thing on unauthorized and limit it to subscribers. So let's talk about Jordan Peterson. And we're talking here about what is rule number 6 in 12 Rules for Life in Jordanetics, my book about Jordan Peterson's philosophy. It's chapter 11. And rule number 6 is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. And when you're talking about houses in regards to Jordan Peterson, the most significant thing that immediately springs to mind is the fact that nearly every wall, even including his bathrooms, and in some cases the ceilings, every wall in his private residence is covered with communist propaganda from the Stalin years. And people try to excuse that. They say, oh, well, he's trying to, remind himself of the evil of the Soviet years. Look, if he had covered his walls with Nazi propaganda, people would assume, quite rightly, that he's a lunatic. Given that he is specifically covering the walls of his residence with the Soviet propaganda because it's evil, specifically from the Stalin years, no less. How is that any more sane? It's not. It indicates a mentally ill obsession with evil, wickedness, suffering, and death. But Peterson is not actually talking about his physical home. And we know this because he does not keep his house, his room, his office in perfect order. There's a rather infamous live stream that he did where it demonstrated how messy his surroundings were. A lot of people thought that was particularly ironic, but it wasn't actually, because he's talking about keeping your mental room in perfect order. Remember, none of Peterson's rules actually describe the meaning underneath the rule. The superficial meaning is there mostly for show. The philosophical meaning, the actual meaning, the true meaning is underneath it. And you have to actually read the chapter to understand what it is. And this, of course, is confusing to people who don't understand the way that esoteric philosophy works. They don't understand why the titular rule has nothing to do with the explanation of the rule. That's because the titular rule is just there as a cover. It's just there to keep the insufficiently developed from going any deeper. So he's talking about cleaning up your mind, and what he means by that is ensuring that your thoughts do not stray too far into the territory of criminal bad think to such an extent that it actually affects your actions. And what Peterson writes about for most of the chapter here is the Columbine killers of all things. Now, what on earth does Columbine have to do with housekeeping? What does Columbine have to do with criticizing the world? Well, the connection is, interestingly enough, very closely tied to the Gammas, who are the reason that I shut down everyone's ability to try to talk back to me and to try to argue and debate with me, because this is not a forum for that sort of thing. And what he observes is that the Columbine killers were angered by the inequitable nature of being. They considered humanity to be contemptible and unworthy of the earth. Peterson describes them as the self-appointed supreme educators of reality and the ultimate critics. That's where the criticizing the world comes in. They're not just critics, they're the ultimate critics. They sought to destroy the lives of others because they saw the world as being insufficient and evil. Now, the world is insufficient. The world is evil. But that's not any reason to destroy the lives of others. The only reason to destroy the lives of others is, in this case, is just because they were purely wicked and hateful. You know, what they were low status lobsters, bitter about their low status, and they took out that bitterness on their innocent age peers. But this particular take on Columbine offers us a very significant insight into Peterson's philosophy. Go back to the first rule. Stand up straight with your shoulders back, which, as we know, really means elevating your status, rising up from the bottom of the totem pole. And so if you interpret Peterson in the context of his own framework, what he's describing in this chapter is how the killers have risen from the chaos of their low status, and they have become god emperors of a tyrannical order, breeding more chaos in their wake. And so his problem is not with their prescription. I'm sorry, let me back up. His problem is not with their diagnosis. Interestingly enough, Peterson agrees with their diagnosis, as I'll demonstrate in a moment. But he believes they went about it the wrong way. They didn't rise to the middle and stay there. They rose to the top, exerted dominance, created chaos, and that was bad. They rose too fast and too far. Now here's what's interesting, and this is what I was saying, in that he didn't have any problem with their perspective. I don't think that you could tell me if these quotes, the average person could not tell me if these quotes came from Jordan Peterson or from the Columbine killers. I'll read 3 of them to you. Perhaps man is something that should never have been. Perhaps the world should even be cleansed of all human presence, so that being and consciousness could return to the innocent brutality of the animal. I believe that the person who claims never to have wished for such a thing has neither consulted his memory nor confronted his darkest fantasies. How can a person who is awake avoid outrage at the world? I'd been obsessed with the idea of war for 3 or 4 years prior to that, often dreaming extremely violent dreams centered around the theme of destruction. And what's really interesting is that Peterson never actually condemns the killers for committing the murders. He condemns them for the thoughts they were having prior to being inspired to murderous action, which happened to be almost identical to the thoughts that Peterson himself expresses. This is kind of remarkable. And so he actually claims that every honest person harbors violent thoughts like these. Now, this, of course, is a demonstration of both Peterson's gamma status as well as his narcissism. He finds it impossible to believe that every honest person doesn't want to run around killing people. Now, I have no doubt that there are people who do occasionally feel that sort of murderous rage and so forth, but I don't believe that every honest person does. And so Peterson is creating a dualism here, and it divides the murderously minded who actually commit murder from the murderously minded who don't. Now, this is entirely the opposite of Jesus Christ's philosophy, where he says if you have committed adultery in your heart, then from a sin perspective, you're just as guilty as someone who actually did it. Now, obviously, that's not a practical standard, but it's not. It's not meant to be. But the point is it's very different. So those are the only two options. And anyone who doesn't believe himself to be obsessed with murdering everybody is delusional. Since all men are murderers in their heart, the only significant distinction lies between those who put their thoughts into action and those who don't. So what that means is we're going back to the first rule again. Both chaos and order, both of which are intertwined with each other and therefore evil, are found in action. The more perfect order, the middle way that he is instructing people to seek, can only be found through not acting. Action is bondage. Action is chaos. Action is order. Action is to be avoided. So he also explains, now we're getting back to the titular rule, how do we divide the difference between Peterson's fantasies and the fantasies of the low-status lobsters like the Columbine killers who actually act? How do you choose to become the correct sort of violent fantasist? And the way that you do that is by putting your mental house in order, by ordering your own experience. Peterson's perspective on the Columbine killers is that they failed because they did not deal successfully with the bullies inside their own minds. Instead of putting their house in order and relying on inaction, they made the mistake of responding to the real world in a real world manner. This, Peterson teaches, is wrong. So, Rule 6 represents a new practice in the middle way, which is consistent with the previous rules. And what he's teaching here is the correct response to the oppression of order, and that is to do nothing. And this is actually a legitimate Eastern philosophy, and it's known as Wu Wei, the action of non-action. And there's a famous poem by Lao Tzu, I'll read it to you here, which I cited in the book. When man is born, he is tender and weak. At death, he is hard and stiff. When the things and plants are alive, they are soft and supple. When they are dead, they are brittle and dry. Therefore, hardness and stiffness are the companions of death, and softness and gentleness are the companions of life. Therefore, when an enemy is headstrong, it will lose in battle. When a tree is hard, it will be cut down. The big and strong belong underneath, the gentle and weak belong at the top. I mean, this is kind of remarkable because it's such a inverted philosophy. It's a philosophy of the weak. There's no wonder that it appeals to low status gammas and omegas, because it's basically saying, well, you deserve to be on top because you don't do anything and you're harmless and you're helpless. And the thing is that this is consistent with what we've seen with Peterson, because what does he do when he's confronted with a kid beating on his daughter? Nothing. What does he do when a kid is acting violently towards his mother? Nothing. What does he do when a woman comes to him and wants to know if she's been raped? Again, nothing. He even talks about in a speech what you should do if someone is talking to you and asking for your help. Do nothing but watch them like a hawk. I mean, it's lunatic. This is not what Lao Tzu actually meant, but that's how the low status males take it. You never have to move because you're not acting. And so Peterson actually suggests that if only everyone would do nothing, the world would cease to be an evil place. And with a continued non-effort and non-action, the collective spirit of man might even be able to bring about an end to tragedy and create paradise right here on planet Earth. This is, of course, the same totalitarian, utopian nightmare that has created body counts from the Soviet Union to Cambodia. But in Peterson's philosophy, from his perspective, the world is fallen into evil only through the actions of men. So therefore, inaction, not doing anything, is the solution to evil. If men simply acted benevolently and remained inside their own heads, restrained themselves inside their own little delusion bubble, paradise would be the result. And so it's very similar to Aleister Crowley's philosophy. Heaven, in whose order is perfection. So it's again nonsense. However, there is a difference between Peterson and Crowley, because Peterson doesn't delve into the implications of his belief that creating heaven on earth is possible to the extent that Crowley does. So Crowley, the interesting thing is that Crowley, who called himself the Beast 666, actually has a vision that is not as dark as Peterson's. Crowley says that no matter how bad the earth is, it's not a prison, it's not a permanent hell, it's a temple to the sacrament of life where everything eventually plays out. So attacking the world, despite it being appearing evil and worthy of destruction, is an attack on the temple and the intrinsic joy of life. Peterson knows nothing of the joy of life. He knows nothing of joy. He can't even conceive of joy because he says life is suffering and pain. And so it's really rather remarkable to see the relationship between Crowley's philosophy, Jordan Peterson's philosophy, and Scientology. You can even compare, in the book I compare the 8 dynamics of Scientology with the 12 rules, and they're weirdly similar. And in both cases, they're not meant to be taken literally. You can't understand the rules on the basis of their titles or their descriptions. You have to delve into the text and figure out what he's talking about. And so, for example, the sixth rule is not about vacuuming your carpets and dusting your bookshelves. It's about curbing your negative impact on the world around you. You're supposed to focus on the internal jihad, not the external one. So the world may be fallen, but you cannot hate or judge the world in its own right. You're the world is you, the two are inseparable, and the improvement can only begin in your own head. I mean, Peterson's philosophy is really something that only a Gamma could create, because only somebody who lives primarily in his head, retreating from the emotional pain of life, would be capable of coming up with anything this nonsensical. And so, what this all comes down to is ultimately what I call the sixth principle of Jordanetics. Inaction is always preferable to action. But even on the practical level, this rule is a complete non-starter. Because how are you supposed to focus on putting your bedroom in order if the barbarians have broken down the front door and are in the kitchen smashing all the dishes? This is a totally impractical, totally useless philosophy, and there's no chance whatsoever it is going to positively affect any young man or young woman who attempts to adopt it and put it into practice. In fact, that's why you see so often Peterson fans expressing extreme disappointment in the fact that they can't figure out what benefit the philosophy actually is to them. They try to stand up straight, they clean their room, etc., etc., but those aren't the real rules. And the real rules are actually poisonous and problematic. So that's it for the discussion of the sixth rule of Jordanetics. Inaction is better than action. I hope you found it interesting. If you want to discuss this Darkstream, I will put up a link to it on my blog. You're certainly welcome to discuss it there, or elsewhere if you like. I understand that there's a Discord server. I believe there's also a Telegraph server, which is dedicated to the Darkstream, where if you're accepted into the group, you are welcome to discuss it. And I would encourage you, if you want to get back to the chats, that you be sure to subscribe here on YouTube so that we can get to the members-only chats sooner rather than later. Let's see. I do have an announcement. We have put up the first, the Legend Chuck Dixon on comics up on Unauthorized. You can look in the books, look in the read books section. Those are two different things. You'll have to first go to read and then go to books, and you'll see the first episode of Chuck Dixon talking about where his ideas come from. Chuck is answering fan mail. He's telling some fascinating stories about the history of comics. He's talking about some of the projects that he's worked on in the past and some of the projects that he's working on today. Obviously, he and I are working on Alt Hero Q together, and he's also been adapting John C. Wright's Swan Knight Saga. So it's really fascinating stuff. He's already recorded a ridiculous number of these. I think we're planning on putting up 2 a week. Really interesting stuff. If it's an area of interest for you, actually, it's pretty interesting, even if it's not an area of interest for you. But it's available to all subscribers. The first episode is actually available to everyone, and we've set up the Legend subscription for anyone who wants to directly support Chuck Dixon's program on Unauthorized. We've got some new features on there too. You might have noticed that you can speed up the playback or slow it down. You probably don't need to slow mine down any, but you might want to speed it up a bit. It's got increments of 0.25, just like YouTube, which is good. And we're still working on the live streaming. It didn't work last night, but we're going to have another whack at it tomorrow. I've got some time set aside with one of the techs, so we're going to go over it and see if there's actually a bug or if I did something wrong. So, also, one final note: if you're an Alt Hero Q backer and you haven't gotten involved in the arbitrations yet, I would encourage you to do so. In light of the new information that we've learned, I think that everyone's going to want to get involved, and so I would encourage you to get in touch with me. Remember, it's going to cost $250 paid to the arbitration service, but that's it. California's consumer arbitration rules mean that the corporation has to pay everything else. And if you want to get involved, just let me know, shoot me an email, and be sure to include your backer number as well as the amount that you backed Alt Hero Q for on Indiegogo. So that's what's going on. Thanks very much for tuning into the Darkstream tonight. Look forward to seeing you at the next one. This is the Darkstream. I'm Vox Day.